Thank you so much, Kristen, for that glowing introduction and for the opportunity to speak with your audience today about global policy and advocacy, which is kind of a lofty topic that we could take in so many directions. So let me make sure my slides are advancing. Yes. So that's basically everything Kristen just told you about me in a picture nutshell right there. That's my autism background. I had a whole different professional career as a lawyer before autism came into my life about 20 years ago. But my firstborn child's diagnosis with autism shortly before his second birthday not only changed our lives personally, but changed my entire professional trajectory. So I have worked in autism pretty much ever since. And it's been a thrill to work with so many folks around the country and around the world, trying to affect change and to make life better for people with autism through policy change. So why is autism even a public policy issue, right? It's a diagnosis that someone receives. Why is it a matter of public policy? I like to start really broad and think about is it because we want to shape how society thinks about autism, how society treats people with autism? Is that really something that is achieved through public policy, or is it achieved through public relations and other means? What services should be available to people with autism? That really starts to get into a matter of public policy. And then more specifically, what funding should be available for people with autism, and where should that funding come from? So if you kind of narrow the funnel down and you think about how society treats autism, what services should society make available? How do we pay for those services? It gets to be a narrower and narrower question. And that's where public policy and advocacy really kicks in. I mean, as my husband likes to say, it's all about the Benjamin. So it's the dollars and cents of it. Where are we going to get the money to pay for the services that individuals with autism deserve? So, as I said, it's a very broad and lofty topic to talk about global advocacy and policy and autism. I picked out, here are 6 different topics that I thought we might talk about today. We may not get to all of them because some of them I could talk an entire day on just that topic. But I picked out some residential and adult services, a topic on that, insurance issues, including advances in coverage and mental health parity protection, Medicaid coverage across the lifespan. There's been quite an effort lately to recognize severe or profound autism as a distinct diagnosis, and that gets into policy matters, safety concerns across the lifespan, and then of course there's been quite a bit of debate and controversy about applied behavior analysis, which we may or may not get to. So I just, as a word of warning, we're going to talk about a lot of different laws that impact people with autism and their efforts to obtain services in particular. We'll talk about EPSDT, and I'll spell all of this out later. We'll talk about home and community-based services, final rule, the settings rule. We'll talk about mental health parity law, but I'll try to explain everything, and then I welcome your questions at the end. Okay, so let's talk about the first one, the need for more and more diverse residential settings and adult services. And I will confess, I talk about this because it's what is impacting my life right now. This is a picture that I use in my presentations a lot when my son was 2 or 3, shortly after he was initially diagnosed, and we're sitting at the beach with his head on my shoulder. But now my head fits on my son's shoulder. This picture is actually a few years old. He just turned 21. And so he's at the proverbial cliff that you fall off of. And I spend a lot of time thinking about adult services, job training, employment opportunities, residential services, and just what a dearth of everything there is. So I'm gonna broaden back out for a second when we talk about adult services, and particularly residential, I'm going to talk about, because there's quite a controversy in the public policy world right now about some laws or regulations that purport to make residential options better for people with autism and other disabilities, but which I would argue do not make them better. So going broad, Medicaid, of course, was signed into law in 1965 in the US. And I'm talking about Medicaid, which is of course, domestic law, but the need for more residential settings is, of course, around the world and probably more dire in other parts of the world, potentially, than here. So this really transcends countries, but I'm going to start with our law with Medicaid. All states and DC and the US territories have Medicaid programs designed to provide health coverage to low-income people. The federal government establishes certain parameters, but each state administers its own Medicaid program, so the rules look different from state to state. If you say you're on a Medicaid waiver in one state, that means something entirely different in California than it means in Virginia. So that can make it difficult to understand what services are available to people with autism. They differ. Just to give you a sense of the breadth of Medicaid coverage, approximately 80 million people in America have their health care through Medicaid, and that includes not only low-income adults, but children, pregnant women, elderly adults, and people with disabilities. There are lots of different programs under Medicaid, but there are two that I'm going to talk about today. One is HCBS, or Home and Community-Based Services, and the other is EPSDT, Early and Periodic Screening, Diagnostic, and Treatment Services. So both of those are part of the Medicaid program. HCBS is part of waiver services, generally speaking, and EPSDT is not dependent upon an individual being on a waiver. Instead, it's a mandatory part of Medicaid in all 50 states. So every state has an EPSDT program, and I'll explain more about that when we get to insurance and Medicaid. But let's talk about the first program, HCBS, Home and Community-Based Services. So home and community-based services provide opportunities for people on Medicaid to receive services in their own homes or in the community rather than institutions or other isolated settings. So it wasn't that many decades ago that people with disabilities, autism included, if they wanted to get services from the government through Medicaid in particular, they had to be a resident of an institution or a similar setting in order to get those services paid for. The government figured, well, if you are functioning at a level that you can live at home, then you probably don't need these services. And so it left families in a difficult position of maybe wanting to keep their loved one at home, but needing the financial assistance that Medicaid provided. And so sometimes someone would go to an institution to live for the rest of their life just so that they could access that funding. HCBS is a program that was designed to stop that so that people did not have to access an institute or live in an institution in order to access funding. The HCBS program said, no, you can live at home or just in the community and still get services. You don't have to live in an institution. So great, great program. Now, in 2014, the federal government put out a final rule implementing home and community-based services program, and it set forth some new requirements for a state to pay for services in a home and community-based setting. The goal, the language on the slide right here, I copied directly from the CMS website because I wanted you to understand the intent as the government saw it. The regulations enhance the quality of home and community-based services and provide additional protections to individuals that receive services under these Medicaid authorities. So this rule, this is at the heart of the controversy. This rule that came out in 2014 called the settings rule or the final rule is very controversial. And the rule was designed, or so the government thought, to provide protections to individuals that receive home and community-based services. Now, the 2014 settings rule established requirements basically in an effort to create a more outcome-oriented definition of home and community-based services rather than one based solely on a setting's location, geography, or physical characteristics. So basically, it said we want to look at a setting, and we don't want to just look at it and say, well, is this place in a neighborhood or is it a facility? What does it look like an institution? We want to instead examine what's happening inside there to determine what are the outcomes? How are people actually being treated there? So that seemed like a good goal, right? It says the regulatory changes issued in 2014 will maximize the opportunities for HCBS program participants to have access to the benefits of community living and to receive services in the most integrated setting, and will effectuate the law's intention for Medicaid home and community-based services to provide alternatives to services provided in the institution, okay? So what it's saying is we're putting out these regulations so that people are really able to access funding while they're in their home or while they're in the community. They don't have to be in an institution, and they can still feel part of the community and integrated into the community. Now, the settings rule identified settings that are presumed to have institutional qualities and thus do not meet the rule's requirements for home and community-based settings. So the rule identified any kind of residential setting that is in a publicly or privately owned facility that provides inpatient treatment. So basically, if it's some kind of residential facility that's part of a hospital, then the government is going to presume that that is more like an institution and not allow this funding to follow the individual there. Also, the government identified any setting that is on the grounds of or immediately adjacent to a public institution. And then finally, the rule identifies any setting that has the effect of isolating individuals receiving Medicaid-funded HCBS from the broader community of individuals not receiving Medicaid-funded HCBS. So basically they said, if you got a place that was designed just for individuals with disabilities, individuals receiving home and community-based services or funding, and they're separated out from people who don't receive that funding, then we're going to presume that that is an institutional type of place to live, and we're not going to provide HCBS funding to people who live there. I wish we were live and in person, because I'd love to read your faces and try to determine if this is all Greek to you or if it's all making sense. It's pretty complex, but it'll start to make some sense here when I go through some examples. Okay, so this is the last really language intense slide. So the final settings rule also talks about the effect of isolating. So again, remember, these three settings are presumed to be institutional, on the grounds of inpatient treatment, on the grounds of a public institution, or a setting that has the effect of isolating individuals receiving HCBS from those who are not receiving HCBS. So what does it mean for a setting to have the effect of isolating? It says a state may include such a setting in its Medicaid HCBS programs only if CMS determines through a heightened scrutiny process based on information presented by the state and input from the public that the state has demonstrated that the setting meets the qualities for being home and community-based and does not have the quality of an institution. So basically it says, if you look like an isolating facility, we're not going to allow people who live there to tap into their HCBS funding. Basically, there's staff who help them live there independently, or not independently, but who support them there. We're not going to let them tap into that funding unless you pass this heightened scrutiny where we're going to scrutinize everything about your operation and make sure that people really have access to the community there. All right, let's try to talk real world and make all of this gobbledygook make some sense now. So again, my son, now grown up. I'm really starting, and my son, by the way, is very severely impaired. He is, well, I was going to say nonverbal, but I think I should say minimally verbal. He's made enormous progress throughout his 21 years, but he is not an individual who will live independently or drive, or he will need supports for the rest of his life. So we are trying to think ahead as his mom and dad and think about where will he live. We won't be around forever. We wish that we would be around long enough to support him throughout his entire life, but the fact of the matter is we were older parents to begin with, and we need to start thinking about where will he live. So I've had the good fortune, as Dr. Soul mentioned, of traveling all around the country. I've worked in all 50 states on autism legislation, dealing with insurance and meeting with families and whatnot. And so what I know from my visit all around the country and all around the world is that everywhere we need more services for adults, more job training, more residential services, more recreational opportunities everywhere. I'm going to, I don't know if everybody can write in the chat or not. I was going to ask people to write in the chat. I've got 4 slides here, and I want you to tell me what they make you think of, okay? And if everybody can't write in the chat, then maybe just the panelists can play along with me. So what does this make you think of? Just give me a word in the chat. Or this. What does this make you think of? Or here. Or here. Those are my 4 slides. Let me see what people are writing. We've got something. Okay, here's what I'm getting. Oh, and the Q&A. All right, so the chat and the Q&A are blowing up. Perfect. I'm seeing options, choices, decisions, different path for each person, choices. Perfect. You guys got it. That's exactly right. That's exactly what I wanted you to say. All of these slides conjure up choices, right? As people who, as non-disabled people, probably many of us on this webinar, we have choices. We have so many choices that we face or that we have an opportunity to make every day. Take a second just to read this paragraph from an article on Sweetwater Spectrum, which is an autism residential facility out in California. So to me, there is a big problem in the autism community in that our policy, our federal and state policy, is restricting choice for people, particularly in the residential arena. All right, one more set of slides. What does this make you think of? This one's pretty obvious. What is that? Somebody help me in the chat here. Or the Q&A, perfect, okay. It's the spectrum. Given the autism spectrum, this is not the DSM technical language, but you know, we all know what a wide varying spectrum, a broad spectrum autism is. And so there should be even more choices for people with autism, because what is a great choice at one place on the spectrum might be a horrible choice for people at another place on the spectrum. So not only do we need to have a range of choices to respect people's individuality, we need to have a range of choices because of the spectrum nature of autism. Let me close my chat. So when I started thinking, I live in South Carolina, and when I started thinking about evaluating residential options for Ryan, I looked around and I thought, gosh, how many residential choices are available in South Carolina for people at all places on the autism spectrum? And guess what? The answer is not many at all. There aren't even enough. Basically, South Carolina, as many states, primarily embraces the group home model. And there aren't even enough group homes for everyone who needs residential services in this state. And that's just one model. And there are some other models. If you have a higher level of need, you might go into an ICF ID, more of a facility. But most people in this state embrace and favor the group home model. I think, having, again, traveled quite a bit, I see all types of different residential models that I would like to see available to Ryan. The bottom corner there is a group home. There are also farmstead programs that I think look very appealing. There are apartment building programs that are specially designed that I think could be a great opportunity for him. There are campuses for people with autism that might be a great opportunity for him. And yet these don't exist, at least in my state, and they're not available options to him. I started really kind of looking around the country at some of the residential programs, some of which have been around for a while and some are newer. There's Cape Cod Village in Massachusetts, First Place. This is a fabulous apartment building in Phoenix that I've been to several times, Irby Ranch in California, Sweetwater Spectrum that I mentioned earlier, Safe Haven Farms in Ohio, as well as Bittersweet Farms in Ohio, the Center for Discovery in New York. Oh my goodness, if you ever have an opportunity to visit there, you should. It's really a whole town now. It started out as just a program and it has grown into a whole town. That's amazing. Right before the pandemic started, I had the opportunity to visit Kolkata, India, the India Autism Center there, building a whole community. So I came back home to South Carolina and hired an architect and designed the community that I would like to see. I thought, okay, we don't already have these options in my state. We've got some time because Ryan is just now 21. So let's build something, right? Let's raise the money and let's build something. So this sketch before you is my idea of an adult autism campus. And you can see on the right side of the screen, there's like a residential section that's got 8 different houses, each of which would house 4 people. And then on the left side of the screen, you've got at the kind of the lower part, you've got a vocational building where there would be job training and there would be employment opportunities as well, maybe a coffee shop. We've already started a t-shirt printing business, some opportunities to learn how to work and some opportunities to work right there on the campus. And then the building kind of in the corner is a recreational building with a gymnasium and various other opportunities for residents of the community, as well as people throughout our town to play together, to have recreational opportunities together, with a pool out back and a basketball court and a tennis court. And then the building kind of right in the center is a community building where there may be some day programs. It's great places for families to come and visit. This whole property is likely to be built on the property behind the church that we go to. We've been in conversations with our church so that there's ample opportunity. Our church has a huge heart for a special needs population, and there would be lots of opportunity for integration with people from the church coming over to have lunch with our residents, or to start a basketball game or whatever, you know, just lots of opportunity for people to play together and work together and integrate. So, so this is my little side project, but guess what? Guess what? Remember that settings rule? So the federal policy that came out in 2014 said, well, the final rule identifies settings that are presumed to have institutional qualities and do not meet the rules requirements for home and community-based settings. These settings include, this is what we went through before, those in a publicly or privately owned facility that provide inpatient treatment. No, we're next to the church, no problem there. On the grounds of or immediately adjacent to a public institution, no problem there. That have the effect of isolating individuals receiving HCBS services from those not receiving HCBS services. Well, does this campus have the effect of isolating people? So, and I apologize for all this text, but this is what the government has said about that. Settings that have the following two characteristics alone might, but will not necessarily, meet the criteria for having the effect of isolating individuals. The setting is designed specifically for people with disabilities and often even for people with a certain type of disability. Check. This setting is very much designed specifically for people with autism, a specific type of disability. And so it absolutely fails that first bullet. Also, the settings, the individuals in the setting are primarily or exclusively people with disabilities, and on-site staff provides many services to them. Absolutely. Each of the homes, it depends on the individuals who occupy the homes. As I said, my son is not able to live independently. He has to take medication at morning and medication at night, and it has to be administered to him, and food prepared for him and whatnot. So if the people in his home have the same profile that he has, then there will be staff in the home. So yes, on-site staff will be providing services to them. The rule also says settings that isolate people from receiving HCBS from the broader community may have the following characteristics. The setting is designed to provide people with disabilities multiple types of services and activities on site, including housing, day services, medical, behavioral, therapeutic services, social and recreational activities. Check, 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 check. I mean, I have designed this campus to be exactly what I think my son would love. And he would love to be able to wake up in his house and without waiting on someone else to decide, hey, it's time that you get to go swim, just walk outside of his door, take the running path around and go for a swim. If he lives in a group home in a community, he only gets to swim on the days that all 4 people in the group home want to swim, and the staff person decides, I want to take these boys for a swim. So I believe that having a campus that does have housing services and recreational services and social opportunities and day services and employment opportunities all right together there for somebody who can't drive. There is no public transportation to speak of where we live. So if he lives in a group home, he's stuck there for the most part. But if he lives in a campus where he can independently walk to and access different types of services, perfect. And by the way, I base this on the nursing home that my mother lived in before she passed away. And it was fabulous. We went to that nursing home to visit her all the time. The restaurants were great. The pool was terrific. The running trails around it were terrific. There were movie nights. There were people from the community came in and gave concerts. It was fabulous. And I thought, this is what I want for Ryan. This is what I want. People in the setting have limited, if any, interaction with the broader community. I don't think that would be the case in this campus. As I mentioned, it's on the grounds of our church where people really have a heart for special needs and would be there with people building community all the time. So anyway, I'm not going to read through all of the rest of this, but you can see the bullets. The following is a non-exhaustive list of examples of residential settings that typically have the effect of isolating people receiving HCBS from the broader community. Farmstead or disability-specific farm communities, gated or secured communities for people with disabilities, residential schools. So I don't know, this is still my dream for my son. It is still my dream to build this campus. And the federal government through this rule and states through their implementation, all states are in the process of implementing this rule, are specifically telling me I can't do it, or I can't do it and expect my son to be able to tap into the funding that he's entitled to through his Medicaid waiver. He will need support. He will need financial support to have staff to support him for the rest of his life. That's what his waiver provides for him. But this rule tells me he can't use that funding in a setting like the campus that has been designed. So this is my last slide on this topic, and then we'll move on. 100%, of course, never want us to go back to the days of Willowbrook and the institutions that treated our community horribly. Absolutely, I understand what the federal government was trying to accomplish. I understand what the states are trying to accomplish. But in the course of dictating everybody should live in a home, in a neighborhood, in the community, that's restricting choice. And I do not support the government restricting our loved ones' choices of what type of setting they would like to live in. Okay, let's move on and talk about an entirely different topic. And I know I blew through a lot of my time on that one, but it's weighing on me, as you can probably tell. Let's talk about insurance issues, including advances in coverage and mental health parity protection. So when you talk about health insurance, I guess there are kind of three questions. One, is there coverage for what you're looking to cover? Two, is the coverage sufficient? Is it capped at a certain level? And three, are appropriate medical necessity decisions being made by the insurance company? I spent, and let me tell you what laws govern each of those. So is there coverage? Generally, you look to state insurance law to determine whether there is coverage. Is the coverage sufficient? You look to state insurance law plus state and federal mental health parity laws. And are appropriate medical necessity decisions being made? You look at state utilization review laws. So let's talk about, is there coverage? As Dr. Soul mentioned in my introduction, this is what I spent more than a decade working on during my time with Autism Speaks, was traveling the country, helping to pass autism insurance mandate laws in all 50 states. So in every state, there is at least some mandatory coverage for the treatments and services that people with autism want and need. That's not to say that every conceivable type of service or therapy or treatment is covered. It's not to say that every insurance plan is subject to that mandate, but every state has taken action affirmatively to ensure that there is some insurance coverage in the autism arena. So that's a huge step forward from a decade or two ago. But then, is that coverage sufficient? Well, some of the state laws have dollar caps or age caps in them. South Carolina's law, it doesn't look the way it looks when I originally wrote it. Coverage for ABA stops at age 16 and it's capped at $50,000 a year. However, that's what's written into state law, and similar caps are written in other state laws. But those restrictions and caps generally are invalid under federal mental health parity law. So in 2008, Congress passed the Wellstone-Domenici Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act of 2008, otherwise known as MAPIA. And MAPIA, this Mental Health Parity Act, basically prohibits insurance companies from treating mental health conditions more restrictively, if that's a word, than they treat physical health conditions. So they can't impose different financial requirements or treatment limits on a mental health condition, which for legal purposes autism is, than they can on physical health care conditions. To break it down a little further, the mental health parity law prohibits an insurance company from imposing disparate financial requirements, which would be things like co-pays or deductibles, and it prohibits them from imposing disparate treatment limitations on autism than they would impose on physical conditions. And the treatment limitations that can't be different or can't be more restrictive are both quantitative treatment limitations, those that can be expressed numerically, like annual dollar limits, as well as non-quantitative treatment limitations, those that can't be expressed numerically, like network requirements or medically necessary standards or pre-authorizations. So your insurance company cannot say, this therapy needs to be pre-authorized and reauthorized every 6 months for autism, unless they have similar pre-authorization requirements in effect on the physical side. This is a hugely powerful law that has served the autism community well, to both ensure that the copays and the deductibles are the same, and to get rid of or invalidate the caps and the limits that are otherwise written into state law. And this is really just another, here are some examples of the types of financial requirements and treatment limitations that are prohibited if they're more restrictive on the mental health side of things. Okay. All right. Yeah, and here's specifically the prohibition on disparate non-quantitative treatment limitations is really powerful. Let's look at example 2. A self-funded health plan limits inpatient behavioral health care with medical necessity criteria when it does not restrict similar medical benefits like inpatient hospice care with similar criteria. Can't do that. You can't do that. And there's litigation happening all around the country to challenge some of these treatment limitations that insurers are imposing. Okay. If you are, the federal mental health parity law applies to most types of health insurance, but not every single type. CASP, the organization that I work for, the Council of Autism Service Providers, has a fabulous appeals guide on our website. It's free. It's a 75-page document that is specifically for appealing autism denials. And on pages 38 and 39 and 40, there's a terrific table here that shows each type of health insurance plan and whether mental health parity law does or does not protect people with that kind of a plan. Okay. I'm just going to blip through a couple others because I see that I am right up at 5 o'clock my time, Eastern time. Are medical necessity decisions being made by the insurance company are appropriate decisions being made? And I'll quickly just touch on this. There was a big case that was litigated over the last few years called Witt versus United Behavioral Health. This wasn't an autism case. It was in the substance abuse arena, but it basically said, look, United Healthcare, you're denying all these claims for people who want residential treatment for substance abuse disorder, but you're denying them by looking at your own internal policies rather than following the generally accepted criteria that has been articulated by the community. So basically in the substance abuse world, there's something called the ASAM criteria, the American Society for Addiction Medicine. It's what everybody follows, except United Healthcare wasn't following it. So they were denying these claims using internal guidelines rather than the ASAM criteria. And the court said, no, you can't do that. Unfortunately, this Witt versus United Behavioral Health win was recently overturned by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. And I mean, a few weeks ago, it was overturned. It's probably going to be appealed further, if I had to guess, but it's a little bit up in the air right now. On the plus side, several states took a look at the ruling in Witt versus United Behavioral Health and said, well, of course the insurance companies should have to comply with the generally accepted standards of care. They can't use their own internal guidelines. And so several states, California being one, Oregon, Illinois, have already, and some states are still working on similar legislation, but like California already passed legislation that says hey, health insurance companies, if you're making medical necessity determinations about substance abuse or autism or other mental health conditions, you've got to use the generally accepted standards of care. You need to look to the nonprofit professional associations in that specialty and use those generally accepted standards of care, not these internal guidelines that you have developed. So even though the Witt versus United Behavioral Health case may or may not ultimately end up in our favor, the states are beginning to codify that principle, and that's a huge step forward for our community. So in the autism arena, there are standards that have been articulated for the last decade. Originally, the BACB put out the Applied Behavior Analysis Treatment of Autism Spectrum Disorder practice guidelines. A couple of years ago, the BACB transferred that entire intellectual property package to CASP. So my organization now houses these practice guidelines that insurers should be following. Those are also available for free and in multiple languages on the CASP website, casproviders.org. Okay, let's see where else. What can we hit in just a minute or two? Okay, this one I can do really quickly, Medicaid coverage across the lifespan. I just want to share that I mentioned earlier that there's a program under Medicaid called Early and Periodic Screening, Diagnostic, and Treatment Services. And this Medicaid program, it's a mandatory Medicaid program that every state has that says, for children up to age 21, Medicaid, we want you to screen those children early in their lives and periodically throughout their childhood, screen them for whatever disorder they may have or condition, get it diagnosed and treat it. Congress just said to the states, you know, we don't want these people growing up with conditions that are impairing for them when we could have treated them if we had found them early and gotten them diagnosed and gotten them treated. So all states have this EPSDT program, and it's a very broad mandate that requires Medicaid to screen the kids, get them diagnosed, get them treatment. And that is the reason that ABA, for example, Applied Behavior Analysis, has been covered for children on Medicaid in every state. EPSDT requires it. It took a number of years to help the state Medicaid programs understand and accept that EPSDT requires that coverage, but they all do now. But the issue is that is for children. By definition, EPSDT program is a program for children. What about adults who need ABA, for example? Maybe, you know, not these intensive 40-hour programs, but maybe something's happened in life and somebody needs a little help from their ABA therapist. And is there coverage under Medicaid for adults with autism? Well, I just wanted to share that that is one of the hot topics right now. Several states are looking at coverage of ABA for adults with autism through their Medicaid program. New Mexico passed a law requiring it. Washington and Indiana, there's litigation about ABA coverage for adults through Medicaid. Massachusetts has a bill pending on that issue right now. So I project that it won't be much longer that it's not just coverage through the EPSDT program for children, but there'll be broader coverage for adults on the spectrum as well.